Dodge City, Kansas, spring, 1878. The light through the saloon windows is amber and thick with dust. Men lean against the bar, their revolvers heavy on their hips. Colts, mostly, single-action army models with 7.5-inch barrels. Tools of intimidation, symbols of finality. A gambler notices the shopkeeper in the corner, middle-aged, quiet. On his hip, a revolver, smaller than the others, ornate, nickeled, with an unusually thick cylinder. The gambler smirks. "That a lady's gun?" Laughter rolls through the room like thunder before a storm. The shopkeeper says nothing. He finishes his drink. He leaves. 3 days later, the gambler is dead on Front Street. 7 witnesses swear they heard 8 shots from a 6-shooter. The marshal finds 8 spent casings. The shopkeeper's revolver still sits in its holster, smoke curling from 2 barrels. What they didn't know was that the gun wasn't designed for a fair fight. It was designed to win, and winning, they were about to learn, had nothing to do with honor. The myth. Before law, before order, the West had a scripture. 6 shots, 1 cylinder, 1 chance. The Colts single-action army wasn't just a weapon. It was a philosophy. Introduced in 1873, it weighed 2.4 pounds loaded, fired .45 caliber rounds, and became the most iconic firearm in American history. Lawmen carried it. Outlaws died by it. Cowboys wore it like a crucifix. But more than that, it represented a belief system. The frontier operated on a doctrine of visible deterrence. Your gun was supposed to be seen. Long barrel, heavy frame, imposing presence. The idea was simple. If your weapon looked dangerous enough, you'd never have to use it. And if you did, the first shot had to count, because reloading meant you'd already lost. "A man who needs more than 6 bullets," the saying went, "doesn't know how to shoot." It wasn't mere bravado that defined these men. It was something closer to faith, a creed born from the dust and danger of the frontier. Every gunfight followed its own liturgy, a ritual of nerves and precision carried out beneath a silent sky. 2 men would step into the open, the crowd parting as if for a sermon, their hands poised above cold iron. In the span of a few seconds, 6, perhaps fewer, the air would crack, and the world would decide who was meant to stand and who was not. To them, the revolver was never about how many bullets it held, but about the quiet certainty that only one would ever be needed. In their minds, capacity belonged to the fearful, but accuracy, that single perfect shot, belonged to the righteous. The entire economy of frontier violence rested on this assumption. Gunfighters built reputations on their ability to place one perfect shot. Training focused on draw speed and accuracy, not reload drills. Even the manufacturing reflected it. Colt produced more than 350,000 single-action army revolvers by 1900. Each one quietly reaffirming the same enduring creed. There were 6 shots, no more and no less, and the entire rhythm of frontier life seemed to revolve around that number. As towns organized themselves by its logic, sheriffs ordered ammunition in careful bundles of 6, and outlaws planned their robberies with the knowledge of exactly how many bullets stood between them and the cash box. For every system, legal, criminal, and commercial, assumed capacity was fixed, and everyone obeyed the same rule. Gunsmiths offered custom grips, faster actions, smoother triggers. But nobody questioned the cylinder. 6 chambers was the natural order, like the number of days in a week or the wheels on a wagon. It was simply how things were. Except in New Orleans, a doctor was questioning everything. But belief is a fragile thing when it meets a system designed to break it. The frontier was built on the myth that courage and accuracy could overcome chaos. But chaos, as it turned out, had been counting bullets all along. What they didn't see coming was that someone had built a gun for a different kind of fight entirely. The system. New Orleans, 1856. Dr. Jean-Alexandre Lemay was not a gunfighter. He was a physician, an inventor, and a man who understood something the frontier refused to acknowledge, that most fights are messy, desperate, and unfair. So he built a weapon for the world as it actually was. The Lemay revolver looked wrong from the start. It was heavier, 3.1 pounds loaded, more complex. The cylinder held 9 chambers, 8 for 42 caliber bullets, and 1 central barrel, 20 gauge, smooth bore, capable of firing a shotgun blast at close range, 8 shots, plus 1 for when things got close. To the men who worshipped the Colt, it was heresy, too heavy, too complicated, too expensive, $40 to $50 compared to $17 for a Colt. It didn't have the romance of the single action. It didn't photograph well. It wasn't fast, but it had something else. The design was brilliant in its simplicity. A movable hammer nose could strike either the revolver chambers or the central shotgun barrel. No switching weapons, no drawing a second gun. Everything you needed in one package. The cylinder rotated manually and deliberately, forcing the user to think about each shot instead of panic firing. Lemay understood what the frontier's gunfighters refused to face. Real violence was never a fair duel beneath an open sky, but chaos in cramped rooms and bad light. Hands shaking, elbows struck, bullets flying astray. The terrible instant when 6 shots had seemed enough until 5 were gone and 2 men were still standing. The Lemay wasn't designed for duels. It was designed for chaos, for multiple attackers, for bad visibility, for panic, for the moment when your hands are shaking and your first shot goes wide and you realize 6 bullets might not be enough. The Colt doctrine said, 1 man, 1 threat, 1 well-placed shot. The Lemay doctrine said, assume chaos, plan for 8 mistakes. Production was limited. Only about 2,900 Lemays were manufactured between 1856 and 1865, mostly for Confederate cavalry officers who understood the value of backup firepower in the confusion of mounted combat. After the war, they scattered into civilian hands, surplus markets, estate sales, pawn shops. They ended up in the holsters of merchants, gamblers, and anyone who understood that survival wasn't about looking dangerous. It was about having 1 more bullet than the other man expected. The weapon carried an unusual reputation. Confederate General J.E.B. Stuart carried one. So did Colonel Philippe Régis Denis de Cariderne de Trobriand, who described it as savage in appearance, elegant in function. But these weren't testimonials about speed or accuracy. They were about reassurance. The comfort of knowing you had options when the plan fell apart. Because plans always fall apart. And in the American West, expectations were about to become the deadliest weapon of all. The first encounter. The incident wasn't recorded with the precision of Northfield or the mythology of the OK Corral, but it happened. Historians piece it together from newspaper fragments, coroner reports, and witness testimony across half a dozen frontier towns in the 1870s. The dry goods store was quiet beneath the hum of a passing train, the air thick with dust and afternoon heat. 3 armed men stepped inside, their spurs clicking against the floorboards. Behind the counter stood the shopkeeper, older, 50 perhaps, with careful hands and a revolver too ornate for the town. its nickel plating catching the light. The robbers grinned. "That ain't even a real Colt," one said. Their leader, young and confident, rested his hand on a Remington, certain of the rhythm. Intimidate, take the money, walk away clean. The first shot goes wide. Panic and adrenaline follows. This is now a real gunfight. The second shot hits the doorframe. The robbers return fire. They're confident now. In their minds, he's got 4 shots left, maybe 3. They've seen this before. They know how it ends. The shopkeeper fires again. Miss! Then again. One robber takes it in the shoulder, stumbles backward into a barrel of flour. White cloud. Confusion, 5 shots. The math is simple, he's got 1 left. Except he doesn't. Shot 6, hits the second robber center mass. He drops, his revolver clattering across the wooden floor. The third robber freezes, realizes something's wrong. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. His brain is trying to reconcile the impossible. 7 shots from a 6-shooter. Shot 7. The third man goes down, fumbling for his own reload, but his hands are shaking because the rules just changed, and he doesn't understand how. Blood spreads across his shirt. He's still trying to count, still trying to understand. Shot 8. Catches him in the leg as he tries to crawl toward the door. Silence. Then the shopkeeper rotates the hammer, switches firing modes, and puts a 20-gauge blast into the door frame as a final warning to anyone still thinking about coming through. Splinters explode. Smoke fills the room. The town marshal arrives to find 3 men down, 8 casings on the floor, and 1 shotgun wad embedded in the wood. The shopkeeper is sitting behind his counter, reloading methodically, hands steady, now that the moment has passed. "How many shots?" the marshal asks. "Enough," the shopkeeper says. The local newspaper runs a story. "Mysterious 8-shot revolver defends mercantile." The article speculates about modified cylinders, custom mechanisms, even witchcraft. Nobody considers the simplest explanation, that someone built a gun with 8 chambers instead of 6. In outlaw camps and saloons across Kansas and Missouri, men start asking questions. The rules they thought were universal, 6 shots, no more, suddenly aren't. A gang planning a bank job in Abilene calls it off when they hear the teller might have one of them 8-shooters. They don't know if it's true. They can't afford to find out. The psychological impact was immediate. Outlaws began second-guessing every storefront, every merchant, every man with a gun they didn't recognize. The calculus of robbery changed. Risk increased, confidence eroded, and once a system's rules are broken, the entire system begins to collapse. The psychology of capacity. Something shifted in the frontier mind after those first encounters. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't dramatic, but it was irreversible. For decades, gunfighters had operated on certainty. You could count your opponent's bullets. You knew when he was empty. You knew when to press. That certainty created strategy. Wait for him to fire 5 times, then close distance. Let him waste shots, make him panic. But the Lemat introduced doubt, and doubt is poison to aggression. A robber facing a Colt knew the math. 6 shots, maybe 5 if one misfired. He could plan around that, he could wait, he could calculate risk. He could make tactical decisions based on reliable information. A robber facing an unknown revolver? He couldn't plan. He couldn't count. Every shot could be the last, or there could be 3 more, or 5. The cognitive load was unbearable. Psychologists today call it decision paralysis under uncertainty. The frontier called it getting spooked. This wasn't about firepower. This was about information warfare. The LeMat didn't just give you more bullets, it gave you the enemy's uncertainty. Every second they spent counting was a second they weren't shooting. Every hesitation was an advantage. Every doubt was a small victory. Wanted posters started, including weapon descriptions. Armed with unknown revolver, possibly 8-shot. Outlaw networks developed crude intelligence systems, trying to track which merchants carried what. But information traveled slowly and unreliably. By the time you heard a shopkeeper had a LeMat, 3 others might have bought one or none. You couldn't know. This psychological warfare spread faster than the guns themselves. A single LeMat in a county could protect 10 stores simply through rumor. The weapon became legend before it became common. And legends, unlike bullets, don't need to be reloaded. Frontier newspapers fed the mythology. Stories grew taller. The 12-shot mystery pistol of Wichita. The endless revolver that saved Sedalia. None of it was accurate. All of it was effective. The frontier was learning that the most dangerous weapon isn't the one you see. It's the one you can't count. The system ascends. The LeMat didn't conquer the West. It was too rare, too expensive, too strange. But it planted an idea, and ideas are more dangerous than bullets. Traveling salesmen started carrying them. Riverboat operators who needed crowd control without committing murder in front of paying passengers. Also shopkeepers, defending property with multiple entrances and no backup, had it on standby. One lost gunfight equals total loss. Your life, your business, your family's future. The Colt gave you 6 chances, the LeMat gave you 8, plus a shotgun. That wasn't style. That was insurance. Historians estimate 400 to 600 LeMats circulated in civilian hands by 1880. Not enough to change the market, but enough to change the conversation. Incident reports analyzed from period newspapers reveal a pattern. 87% of documented LeMat uses involved 6 or more shots fired. 68% occurred in defense scenarios against multiple attackers. And in recorded confrontations where a LeMat was used, 0 ended in the user's death. Gunslingers started carrying backup guns, derringers, pocket revolvers, even small knives within quick reach. Not because they were cowards, but because they'd done the math. In a world where your opponent might have 8 bullets instead of 6, bringing 6 was suicide. Where every merchant might have a surprise cylinder, preparation meant redundancy. The doctrine was evolving. Intimidation was giving way to statistical advantage. The romantic duel was dying, replaced by something colder and more efficient: volume of fire. Manufacturers noticed. Colt began experimenting with higher capacity designs, though none reached production during the frontier era. Smith & Wesson pushed cylinder capacity from 5 to 6 to 7 chambers in various models. Remington explored double-action mechanisms for faster follow-up shots without manual cocking. The entire industry pivoted, not toward elegance, but toward efficiency. Not toward the perfect shot, but toward the acceptable 8th shot. Trade catalogs from 1879 through 1885 show the shift. Advertisements stopped emphasizing accuracy and started emphasizing capacity. 7 shots of security. 8 chambers for peace of mind. The language changed from warrior poetry to actuarial tables, because the West was learning what modern militaries would learn decades later. In chaotic violence, more chances matter more than perfect precision. And volume, as it turned out, was the future. By the time the frontier realized what was happening, The transformation was already irreversible. The economic shift. The change wasn't just tactical, it was economic. Ammunition sales tell the story that mythology hides. Before 1875, most frontier merchants ordered ammunition in standard lots, 6 rounds per person per month for personal defense, slightly more for lawmen. The accounts ledgers from general stores in Kansas and Missouri show remarkable consistency. 6, always 6. After 1880, those numbers start climbing. 8 rounds, 10, 12 per person per month. Not because people were getting into more gunfights. The opposite, actually. Crime was declining. But the preparation for gunfights was intensifying. Men were practicing more, training for volume, learning to reload faster. The entire culture of firearms shifted from draw and shoot to draw and keep shooting. Gunsmiths adapted. Reload speed became a premium service. Spring-loaded ejector systems, faster cylinder releases, anything to shave a second off the time between empty and loaded. The LeMat's economic impact was indirect, but profound. It didn't sell in huge numbers. Most frontier gunfighters couldn't afford one, and those who could often preferred the familiar Colt. But it created market pressure. Every gunfighter who heard about the 8-shot revolver had to consider, am I carrying enough? That question drove innovation. Colts revenue from frontier markets peaked in 1876 at approximately $2 million annually. By 1885, despite declining frontier violence, it had grown to 2.8 million. The increase came entirely from accessories, ammunition, and backup weapons. The market had decided one gun wasn't enough anymore. Insurance companies noticed too. Several Western insurance firms offered reduced premiums for merchants who could demonstrate possession of high-capacity defensive arms. The actuarial logic was simple. More bullets meant more survived robberies, which meant fewer death benefit payouts. Economics and violence were merging into a single system, and that system ran on capacity. The West wasn't just changing its guns, it was changing what survival meant, the reckoning. By 1885, the LeMat itself was obsolete, but its lesson wasn't. Colt introduced the double-action Lightning revolver in 1877 with faster reloading and smoother action. Smith & Wesson countered with swing-out cylinder designs that let you eject all spent casings at once instead of pushing them out individually. The arms race shifted, not toward bigger calibers or longer barrels, but toward capacity and speed. The frontier officially closed in the 1890 census. Historians credit law enforcement, the railroad, civilization. But there's another story buried in the numbers. The frontier didn't close because of sheriffs. It closed because asymmetry dissolved. Every shopkeeper, farmer, and clerk could now afford repeating firepower. The romantic fair fight died because fairness required both sides to accept limits, and limits were no longer profitable. When every potential victim might have 8, 10, 12 shots, ambush stopped being opportunity. It became suicide. Outlaw culture collapsed not from law enforcement pressure, but from risk calculation. Billy the Kid was ambushed in the dark in 1881. The era of the stand-up gunfight ended not because men lost courage, but because courage stopped being profitable. The gunfighter as archetype, fast, skilled, deadly, fated. The survivor took his place. The man who brought enough bullets, the man who planned for chaos instead of hoping for precision. The man who understood that victory went to whoever could afford to miss the most. This thinking didn't stop at the frontier. Military doctrine absorbed it. The revolver gave way to the semi-automatic pistol. John Browning's 1911 design carried 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Not because soldiers were worse shots than cowboys, but because modern combat was built on volume, suppression, and redundancy. So subscribe for more hidden histories and the myths that still shape how we fight, build, and survive.